Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So the Home Secretary Theresa May has delivered a tough message on immigration to the Conservative conference in Manchester. But her promises were controversial, notably a new asylum scheme, which she said would protect refugees who really need it, but crack down on people who abuse the system. Both her speech and a contrasting One Nation offering from Boris Johnson are being seen as early pitches to regain ground ceded to George Osborne in the still-to-be-declared Conservative leadership stakes. Our political correspondent Michael Crick has this.
13 years ago, she famously warned that some people called the Conservatives the nasty party. Yet today, Theresa May came to make a speech to show that, despite the figures, her party talks tough on immigration. There's a limit, she said, to how much a country can take.
While we must fulfill our moral duty to help people in desperate need, we must also have an immigration system that allows us to control who comes to our country. Because when immigration is too high, when the pace of change is too fast, it's impossible to build a cohesive society. It's difficult for schools and hospitals and core infrastructure like housing and transport to cope. And we know that for people in low-paid jobs, wages are forced down even further, while some people are forced out of work altogether.
At times, you'd hardly think that she was the minister in charge of immigration for the last 5 years.
So there is no case in the national interest for immigration of the scale we have experienced over the last decade.
The Institute of Directors accused her of irresponsible rhetoric and pandering to anti-immigration sentiment. But the Tory grassroots loved it.
It's really good, very impressive speech.
That's a woman, a lady, that realises there is a problem with migration, and to look at it with compassion, but also to look at it with common sense. We are a small island.
Excellent speech.
The speech of a future leader, do you think?
Oh, very much so, yes. Until then, I was not plugging for her as leader, but after that speech today, I've changed my views.
Really? Who were you going for before then?
I'll keep that under my hat, Boris, but he's still got a chance.
And so to the Mayor of London.
I'll be back in.
Now, Lord Ashcroft's new book says that 4 years ago, Boris Johnson forced George Osborne to cough up another £93 million for policing in London, in return for Johnson not causing mischief through his column in The Telegraph on the day of Osborne's big speech here at the Tory conference.
Today, I tried to get Johnson to respond to Ashcroft's allegation. See, you're not denying it. You're not denying it, are you?
I'm neither conceding or denying it. I think
all I'm urging
you
one
to do
column.
is develop some consistency in your line of questioning.
All right, well, I'll ask it again then.
Come on.
You're not denying you've got 90 million to keep quiet. Lord Ashcroft got it right on that.
Come on.
George Osborne's office refused to comment. Where May had gone to the right, Johnson bumbled leftward, repeatedly talking of One Nation and making it clear he wasn't happy with the government's cuts in tax credits for lower-paid workers.
Affecting the British public, we must make sure as we reform welfare and as we cut taxes that we protect the hardest working and the lowest paid. Retail staff, cleaners, the people who get up in the small hours, work through the night because they have dreams about what they and their families can achieve. The people without whom my economy, the London economy, would simply collapse. The aspiring, striving, working people.
There were plenty of jokes and jibes against Labour, but the strongest bit stressed his opposition and that of the Tories' new candidate for London Mayor, Zac Goldsmith, to a third runway at Heathrow, thought to be the government's preferred option.
Let's not bodge it with one runway in the wrong place in a short-termist, old, failed, tired, and environmentally disastrous solution. One of the many things, Zach, on which you and I are at one. Let's compete with every other major economy from Germany to France to Spain to Holland to India to every Gulf state to Turkey to China and do the job properly this time.
The big message, I'm still a contender.
Boris is still number one as far as I'm concerned.
What a difference a speech makes.
Gary Gibbon joins us live now from Manchester. Well, Gary, there's at least two audiences there. I mean, they're in the hall and in the country at large. So who was Theresa May trying to address in her speech, do you think?
Well, as you say, both of them, really. She wants to tell the country at large that she might be the Home Secretary presiding over a rise in net migration, but her heart beats somewhere else. She'd like to be doing other things. But the focus really, you can't help thinking, is the Tory selectorate, the people who will choose the next Tory party leader. They're on her mind as well. MPs decide which two names go out from amongst the MPs to the party members, who then get to vote on who becomes leader. And it's nearly always the case, you would expect, that there'll be someone who is the candidate of the right. And you can't help thinking that she was trying to pitch her flag somewhere around there. And one thing they particularly noticed, people on the right of the party that I was talking to today, was when she said that EU levels of migration were unsustainable. Now, logically, that could take you to a position where you end up saying we shouldn't be part of Europe. She hasn't said that. Some of them, twinkly-eyed, are wondering whether they just might have a recruit further down this referendum story.
Well, what do you reckon David Cameron thought about it all?
Well, we weren't able to study his face because he chose not to be in the room for the speech. He's often in there for major speeches. He'd seen an advance of this. I think we'll get a proper flavour of what he thinks about this when we hear his speech tomorrow. The language will not be the same as the language used by Theresa May. The flag will be pitched somewhere else altogether, from what I gather. It'll be a more liberal speech, talk about equality, focusing on different issues, trying to talk about one nation. Very much not her theme, and I think that'll give us a clue what privately he really thought about it.
Gary in Manchester, thank you very much. John.
Well, a little earlier today, I sat down with the Prime Minister in Manchester. I began by asking him whether he agreed with Theresa May's assessment that mass immigration is not economically productive.
People who come here are economically productive. Many people who come here are working and are contributing. The point Theresa was making in her speech is that you do have to look at all of the economic arguments around migration. And we have to accept, and sometimes, frankly, the elites don't accept, that when you get a lot of unskilled migration, that can hold down or drive down wages. That can have an effect on some of the poorest but hardest working people in your country. So to me, there's a sort of twin aim here. Let's have reform to welfare so we don't automatically over-attract people to Britain, but let's actually train and skill our own people here in Britain, not least with the 3 million apprentices we're going to train in this Parliament, so they can do the jobs that our dynamic economy is creating.
But the counter-argument which the Office for Budget Responsibility offers is that, in actual fact, about a fifth of our growth is down to new people coming into the country.
Well, you've got to look at GDP, but you also got to look at GDP per capita. So again, you know, the economists can knock around all the arguments and the figures tell us a variety of things, but I think it's important to measure net migration because people are concerned to the British people and to me.
You know the rate, the birth rate, for example, that the Polish immigration, 600,000 Poles came in the last 10, 15 years. And Britain is right up there now in one of the most satisfactory birth replacement.
No, it is. We have one of the reasons.
And can we do without that?
Well, no,
look at Mrs. Merkel. She's having to bring in refugees.
Yes, but there's a very big difference between Britain and Germany, which is that Germany has a declining population. We have a growing population. Our birth rate is at replacement levels. So we don't need to have another big wave of net migration to Britain. But what we have to do that is to sort out the welfare rules that are over-attracting people from Europe, take further steps to make sure that we're not bringing in people from outside Europe as bogus students or the like, and get the numbers under better control, which is what Theresa's speech was all about.
Well, now, it's been big at this conference, the party of the working family, working party, working for you, George Osborne, the builder. Yet you are penalising the very, very poorest of those working families.
Well, that's not the case, actually. If you look at, let's take
20% of them.
Well, first of all, let's take the lowest paid people. The lowest paid people are going to benefit from the national living wage, so that is a 50p increase next year per hour, a £20 a week pay rise for the lowest paid people. The lowest income families, obviously we are making changes to welfare, but at the same time as cutting taxes and introducing the national living wage, and of course the people on the lowest incomes are better protected because they keep the elements of the child credit that we've introduced.
If what you say is true, will you give a pledge that if it turns out that there are thousands of people who are very badly affected by this change, you will do something about it?
Well, no, we thought very carefully
that's
before...
the question I'm asking.
Well, I'm answering it. We thought very carefully before introducing this change, a change that's passed through Parliament, and it's that combination of a national living wage, reaching £9, tax cuts, so next year you can earn £11,000 before you pay any income tax, and yes, these welfare changes, I know they are difficult decisions, but that combination, I believe, is fair.
You've got a lot on your plate, domestically and internationally, and so perhaps we could just look at Syria. Sure. Now, the problem with Iraq was there was no plan for after Saddam. The problem with Libya, in which you strongly participated, there was no plan for after Gaddafi. What's your plan after Assad?
Well, first of all, on Syria, there was a plan. It just didn't work. There was a Libyan government. We worked hard to help that government, but it didn't survive. It didn't survive. It's been
and
very
most
difficult.
People who knew anything about Gaddafi knew it would be a catastrophe.
Well, except for most people who knew anything about Gaddafi knew A, he was about to butcher people in Benghazi, and B, he was someone who'd supplied Semtex to the IRA. Incidentally, Semtex that the dissident IRA probably still have. So anyone who thinks that somehow keeping Gaddafi in place was a friend of Britain, I think is making a great mistake.
No, but that doesn't
we
tell
digress.
That doesn't tell us what your plan
Syria,
now
yes,
is.
The plan is that we need a Syrian government that can represent all of the Syrian people. Of course, it has to have people at its head that can reassure the Alawites that they are part of the future of Syria.
So who have you got in mind? Who have you got in mind?
We are working with our allies, and frankly, we have tried to work in the past with the Russians, with the Iranians, and with others, and we must try again to identify a team of leaders and a structure where Sunni, Christian, Alawite, Kurd can all feel that they will be properly looked after in Syria. Otherwise, anything we do is not going to solve the problem long term. Meanwhile, we should still do everything we can to degrade and destroy ISIL because they are a direct threat to us.
People are going to find it very curious that we are actually backing al-Nusra with its close relationship with al-Qaeda.
Well, we're not backing al-Nusra, that's not the case.
So who are
we back the Free Syrian Army.
Right,
we
which
back
is virtually non-existent.
No, we back the legitimate Syrian opposition.
So we have nothing to do with al-Nusra at all?
We don't
nothing
support,
at all?
No, absolutely. We do not back al-Nusra. We do not back any of the extremists because that is not in our interests. Frankly, we need to do more to back the legitimate. I don't accept that all opponents to Assad are either ISIL or al-Nusra.
So
there are thousands of people who want to see a peaceful, democratic, a diverse Syria, and that's who we back.
Now, you've been asked to intercede with the Saudis over the 17-year-old boy who was arrested when he was 14 and who faces execution and crucifixion. Have you?
Well, we have raised this as a government, yes.
Have you personally?
No, the Foreign Secretary has raised this, our embassy has raised this, we raised this in the proper way. I'll look to see if there's an opportunity for me to raise it as well, but we oppose the death penalty anywhere and everywhere, and we make that clear in all our international contacts.
Well, but that's curious, because we, in November, did a deal with the Saudis that we would back them joining the Human Rights Council of the United Nations, providing they backed us. Now, this sounds a bit squalid for one of the most human rights abusing regimes on earth.
Well, Saudi Arabia is a member of the United Nations, but we completely disagree with them.
Well, why did you want them inside the human rights?
Well, we completely disagree with them about the punishment routines, about the death penalty, about those issues.
Well, why did we do this deal then? I mean, they're not the right sort of people to be doing any sort of a deal on human rights.
Well, we totally oppose their record in that area.
Why did we do it?
Well, I say we totally oppose their record.
No, but why did we do it?
Well, I've answered the question.
Well, that isn't an answer, is it? I mean, we had done a horrid deal. It was very well exposed in the Financial Times.
We have a relationship with Saudi Arabia, and if you want to know why, I'll tell you why. It's because we receive from them important intelligence and security information that keep us safe. I could come on your programme, John.
Sure?
Let me just give you an example. Yes,
are we sure that they are not actually, some elements of them, within the clerics and elsewhere, the Wahhabi radicals, involved actually in fueling the very people we're trying to defeat in ISIS?
I will answer that very directly, because I think you're asking a very important question. But the reason we have the relationship is our own national security. I can think of one occasion since I've been Prime Minister where, a bomb that would have potentially blown up over Britain was stopped because of intelligence we got from Saudi Arabia. So, of course, it'd be easier for me to come on your programme and say, well, I'm not having anything to do with these people, it's all terribly difficult, etc., etc. For me, Britain's national security and our people's national security comes first. Right, second question. Look, Saudi Arabia itself actually has quite a good record of de-radicalizing people who have become radical terrorists and jihadists. It has quite a good record of de-radicalizing them. But if you're asking,
do we think yes, no, I'm
going to
what
answer
they've
your question.
done is to export a great deal
absolutely.
of it out to Pakistan, out into Arabia.
Are we doing enough to say we need to have a version of Islam that properly promotes peace and tolerance and does not in any way encourage hatred of other religions or demonization of Jews, or that provides a backdrop to the radicalization that can take place? That is something we need to do far more of, and we're doing in our own country, and we need to do more of that in discussions we have with other countries, including with Saudi Arabia, and I've started on that process.
Finally, Prime Minister, are you looking forward to retirement?
Well, I'm looking forward to the next 5 years. I feel I'm halfway through the most important job of my life, and I'm going to give it everything I've got.
All 5 years?
Oh, yeah.
Prime Minister, thank you for talking to us. Tonight's main news, that tough line on immigration spelt out by the Home Secretary Theresa May. Our social affairs editor Jackie Long has been to Hemel Hempstead to visit a community cohesion charity set up after World War II to integrate families moving there from London and to test out the public mood.
When immigration is too high, when the pace of change is too fast, it's impossible to build a cohesive society.
Hey, welcome back on Radio Dakarun with Radio Rezi and Julia. And
at the back of an estate in Hemel Hempstead, a community radio station with a very global sound. Today's presenters, immigrants from Latvia and Italy.
What about the argument that high levels of immigration can mean, Theresa May says, local people losing out on jobs to immigrants?
Yeah, I think that's true, yeah. I also tried to find a job, and it's quite also difficult, also in Latvia, also here, everywhere.
To me, is that it's not true at all. Most of the time, immigrants are just doing jobs that we don't want anymore to do.
And from a station where scores of languages are spoken, the biggest criticism, the language Mrs May used.
A speech like this could be just a way to put other fears on people's minds, and no, it's not a solution.
And working well and living well together.
In nearby Hemel Old Town, Mark Mitchell runs a charity originally set up to integrate families moved from London after the war. Now it works with a small but growing immigrant population. Today's speech was, he says, unhelpful.
To me, the most important thing is welcoming people, welcoming their cultures, sharing cultures, and making sure that as a result we all become richer and we all have a better quality of life.
And you don't accept that for many people that will be sort of liberal pie in the sky, if you don't mind me being so rude.
I don't mind you being so rude at all. I mean, liberal pie in the sky, yes. But we live in a 24/7-hour society, a global society, and we have to embrace that change and make that change better for everybody.
Theresa May is acutely aware that across the country, on the streets, immigration matters. A recent Ipsos Mori poll put concern about immigration at the highest level ever recorded. The facts and figures don't seem to matter. Perception is everything. Even here in Hemel Hempstead, where the vast majority of people define themselves as white British and immigration levels are relatively low, her speech struck a chord. She is talking very tough on immigration. That's appealing to you?
Yes, it is appealing to me. Yes, I think somebody should start to look into it seriously.
She says that she believes high levels of immigration push down wages and can mean local people.
Yeah, are not getting the jobs that they deserve, because all the immigration people are getting them, I do feel that,
It can drive down wages, but I think we also need them.
But the country needs, Mrs May said today, far fewer. A message she clearly hopes will play well.
Well, while the Home Secretary was setting out her immigration stall in Manchester, thousands of business people were gathering at the Institute of Directors Convention in London. Our business editor, Siobhan Kennedy, was there, and there were some pretty interesting views from the big bosses, weren't there?
Well, the boss of the IOD, Simon Walker, fair enough to say he was pretty irate. He said that Theresa May's comments were irresponsible. He said it was extremely unhelpful to have a senior cabinet minister go out there, put the shutters up with the message that foreigners are not welcome here. Now, that might play well, he said, in tomorrow's Daily Mail, but how will it play in the Times of India, for example, and other places where we need to attract talent from? I caught up with him today and with other senior business figures.
My concern is that this is pandering to prejudice and misinformation on an issue where there are wrong thoughts out there that are not based on accurate analysis. It is the willingness to accept those skills and to harvest the talent of those people to contribute to this economy that remains important.
So don't shut them out, Home Secretary.
I don't think we should shut anybody out. I think we should recognise that we are an economy that needs skills and help from all over the world to be the best in the world.
Crucially, both Sir Roger there and the IOD contradicting Theresa May's central premise that migration contributes close to zero to the British economy. They say that's simply not true, that she's just peddling that populist myth. They say that all the data points to immigration contributing to the economy. Migrants come here to work, not to draw down benefits. Worth pointing out, Kathy, this on the day that the IMF has warned of slowing global growth. Now, some would say, with the worries that there are here about slowing productivity in Britain, that we need all the help we can get.
I've been